Welcome back, everybody. It's Wednesday, September 4th, 2024. Born on this date in 1932, University of Georgia legendary coach and athletics director Vince Dooley of Mobile. In 1950, former Major League pitcher Doyle Alexander of Cordova. Story on Alexander. He did 2 stints with the Atlanta Braves. The second one ended when he was traded to Detroit for a prospect. Now, he was a great pickup, major right-handed force, won 9 games during the second half of the season, and helped the Tigers win the division title that year. Turns out the Braves did pretty well also. The prospect they acquired for Alexander was future Hall of Famer John Smoltz. Today is National Newspaper Carrier Day. We're also going to talk about the pending retirement of the longest currently serving college chancellor, an update on Friday's triple homicide, and a widow who says a Florida hospital removed the wrong organ from her husband. Then we're going to talk to Lita Gore about presidential race polling trends. I'm Mike Morgan, and we're down in Alabama. Now, how long has Jack Hawkins Jr. been chancellor at Troy University? Here are some ways to illustrate it. Hawkins became chancellor at Troy less than 3 years after George Wallace's final term as governor ended. Also, Larry Blakeney became Troy's football coach 2 years after Hawkins became chancellor. Blakeney's been retired for 10 years, and yet Blakeney coached at the school so long they named the football field after him. And one other thing, when he retires in October 2025, according to Troy, Hawkins will be the longest-serving chief executive of a public university in the nation. AL.com's Rebecca Griesbach reports that the school announced his coming retirement on Tuesday. It'll put his tenure at Troy over 35 years. During that time, enrollment at the school grew from under 5,000 students to more than 14,000, and of course underwent that name change from Troy State University to Troy University in reaction to the system's many campuses and broader focus. Yesterday, we talked about last Friday's triple homicide at a Bessemer gas station. Now, AL.com's Carol Robinson reports that the 20-year-old who was charged in the shootings was out on bond at the time in the shooting death of a 15-year-old girl in February 2022. Police said at the time they thought Rakeem Cunningham of Lipscomb and the victim were playing with a gun, and it fired. Cunningham's bond from that case has now been revoked, and he's charged with manslaughter. For his alleged involvement in Friday's killings, he's been charged with capital murder, meaning he would qualify for the death penalty. A Muscle Shoals widow says her husband died in an Okaloosa County, Florida hospital after a surgeon mistakenly removed his liver instead of his spleen, reports AL.com's Howard Koplowitz. Ascension Sacred Heart Emerald Coast is not commenting or confirming any of the claims. A lawyer for Beverly Bryan said her husband, 70-year-old William Bryan, was at his rental property in the Florida Panhandle when he started having pain, went to the hospital, and was told he needed surgery immediately to remove his spleen. The lawyer said the surgeon removed his liver, causing a major artery to be cut, and labeled the organ spleen. The mistake wasn't discovered immediately, the lawyer said, and the man suffered sudden blood loss and died. Well, we're going to take a quick break and come back to talk about political polling in general, and specifically regarding this presidential campaign we're all so caught up in. Y'all stay with us. Well, thanks for staying with us, everybody. Today, we have in the studio a familiar voice to longtime listeners. Lita Gore is a managing producer at AL.com who specializes in trending topics. And specifically to this summer, that includes the polling trends during this presidential election season. Welcome aboard, Lita.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for taking the time to do this with us and bringing your expertise to the virtual studio. And before I get started, in that intro, I think I undersold the election. I think I'm supposed to say during this, the most important presidential election in our lifetimes, which is pretty sure what we've called every election since 1992 at least. Am I right?
Yes, I think I've lived through about 800 of those ever important elections, and to kind of highlight that. Well, I mean, my last name is Gore, and it used to be whenever I would say that, somebody would say, "Oh, like Al Gore," and now no one says that. So in like 10 years, it'll be interesting to see if we still comment. Although I think we probably still will comment on this one, but it is funny how the political memory is short.
Unless you marry a guy named Nixon, in which case it'll
I
stay
guess
with you.
so. Yeah.
Can you do us a favor? Tell us a little bit on the latest polling data and how we've been trending in this presidential election.
Okay. It's really I've followed these polls for a long time because I think this is, I don't know how many elections I've covered in my life, but polls have really kind of taken on a life of their own, and they're quite fascinating in their methodology and who conducts them and how they're conducted, and how no one really believes the poll unless it agrees with what you're going to vote, and then they think it's right.
That's right.
But we kind of have the pre Biden polls and then the post Biden polls. And they are so polar opposite that it's truly fascinating, because before July 21st, when President Biden dropped out, Trump was very much in command. 5, 6 point polling differences, even in traditionally blue states, was doing well. If he wasn't winning them, he was doing well. Um, and it was pretty much across the board. And I like to look at not just individual polls, but I like to look at the polling averages, because I think that gives you a better, perspective over
Hmm.
things, because you always have outliers. And then after it was remarkably quick after Biden dropped out, we saw this massive swing the opposite direction. There was a couple of days of sort of like a lull, but then the polls have swung completely in the direction of Kamala Harris, um, bolstered a lot by young voters, African American voters, and interestingly enough, third party voters who early on were more voting for Trump. Even before Kennedy dropped out of the race, they were sort of leaning towards Trump. Now they're leaning more towards Harris. So it's really the tale of two halves of this election on who's leading.
I've wondered for several presidential election cycles whether the conventions, I mean, obviously they're big deals, but uh, with all this oversaturation of political news and faces and quotes, and if the bump is going to smooth out this year, can't really tell us
Mm-hmm.
because it seems like I'll get your take on it. Both conventions managed to have events happen just before the convention that seems to be probably a bigger bump than the actual
Yeah,
convention with Trump
yeah.
surviving the shooting and then Kamala Harris replacing Joe Biden.
It was a very interesting timeline because, okay, so Trump has the boost he got after the assassination attempt, and was really riding that wave into the convention up until pretty much his acceptance speech, which was a little more sort of a rambling, more what he had kind of done in the past, and I think people were looking for something a little different. And his numbers started to trend down from there. And it just so happened that Kamala Harris sort of came on board at that time. Now, she has absolutely enjoyed a boost from the convention. I think her vice president, as more people got to know him, they enjoyed that boost, or she saw that boost. But interestingly enough, today, when I was looking at the polls, even though she's still, I think the latest was like 4 or 5 points ahead, it is starting to level out a little bit.
Hmm.
And that the one thing you have to look at two things with polls. One is a margin of error. So if I'm up by 1 point, but the margin of error is 4. That's a toss up. And really, other than a few outliers, like I saw one poll today that had her up by 18 points. I don't think that's correct. I mean, I
No.
think that's, Reagan was probably up by 18 points, but that was about it. But that was probably the last time we saw that kind of overflow. You have to look at the margin of error and see, like, what are we doing? And people always question, like, oh, did they interview only Democrats? Did they poll only Republicans? Well, you can see that methodology, and we always try to include that. How many people did they talk to? Did they target? Are they registered voters? Are they likely voters? Are they whoever picked up the phone? I mean, there's a lot that goes into this. The other thing I think that makes this election, the last 2 elections, so interesting when it comes to polling is having been a part of some organizations that did polling, not about politics, but other less divisive things in the past,
Mm-hmm.
polls used to be extremely expensive. And there were very few like polling data companies that did this. Well, now one of the more popular polling companies, or polling sites, they'll have 11,000 responses an hour after a speech. So it's made the polls more volatile because they're not conducted over the course of 2 weeks. They're conducted over the course of 2 hours. So one of the reasons I got asked recently, why are you doing so many stories on polling? I'm like, because it changes literally twice a day. And I try to explain to people, we do look at the source of the polling. Is it considered super right wing, super left wing? Try to go down the middle. And toss out the outliers, like you're up by 18 points. That just it wasn't logical. So I think that the polls do tell you sort of trends. You just have to keep these things in mind of what the source, who's doing it, how many people were involved, that sort of thing.
That's interesting what you said, and I have never really thought about that. You get these polls that are so speedy and so efficient, but
Mm-hmm.
if you get all your polling data in the same moment, I mean, there could be
Yep.
discrepancies. We talk about discrepancies over whether Democrats or Republicans are more likely to vote in the rain. Surely,
Right. Oh
you
yeah.
may
Yeah.
pick an hour when Republicans are asleep or Democrats are asleep, and I mean, who knows what
Absolutely.
different types of people are up to?
Um, I have actually read some studies behind some of the polls. What is on TV and who will answer the phone?
Yeah.
Um, that matters. What part of the country, obviously, what part of the country, but let's say I'm polling during an Alabama football game. Not Saturdays, but something close. so,
Hmm.
so a tight game. I'm not going to answer the phone.
Right.
So they're not going to get the representative sample. That you might get. There's so many things that can skew a poll. That's why I like averages better, because I think you're getting a broader base of things. And even if you do have a couple of ones that are more extreme on either side, it helps to average it out, the
Yeah.
two things. Now, here's the other interesting part about all this. Just as quickly as Kamala Harris's numbers rose, they could tank tomorrow.
Hmm.
And I think the next time we will see the real impact on polling will be after that debate, which I do not remember the date of, but it's soon. It's coming up. I think that debate could really be key. I mean, this election is barreling down. I mean, we're staring down it now. We're in the home stretch. And I think that will be the next big wave if somebody really bombs. I mean, you look before the last debate, we had a totally different Democratic candidate, and he
Right.
appeared on one stage, and within 2 minutes, we were like, "Oh, that won't work." I mean,
Yeah,
that's what
that's right.
happened.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
So
right. The debate is Tuesday, September 10th on
that's
ABC,
September 10th.
by the way. And
Okay, there you go.
the debate was my next question because that's the next moment.
Yeah.
Now, the follow-up to that is because it's so late. I don't guess it's that late in the cycle. I think because the Biden Trump debate was so early, it feels like it is.
Yeah.
But people are famously in their camps come September, and
Yes. Yes.
although it can swing, eh, I think it's more likely to swing who's excited enough to show up to vote than
That's
it would
exactly what it
the
does. Yeah,
numbers. Yeah.
that's exactly what it does. And interestingly enough, that's another interesting polling thing. So Harris has really excited this demographic of 18 to 34, but traditionally that's not your biggest voting block. Your biggest voting block is, 55 and older.
Hmm.
Um, that show up to the polls no matter what. And if you remember years ago, the whole rock the vote, where MTV
Yeah.
was going to rock the vote and they were going to get
Right.
all these young people out, and none of the young people actually were even registered or went to vote. Now, I mean, times have changed, and I think you see some of that. But if this debate, I think the debate could hurt somebody. I don't know if it's really going to change anybody's mind. I think
Hmm.
most people's minds are made up. We do have that little like, I think most of the undecideds are polling below 8%. But in a race this close, 8% could, it depends on where those 8% live, but 8% could swing the election.
Yeah. I think rock the vote came up in the first election I voted in. And I remember that they were registering people after Pearl Jam concerts. And I'm like, well, this is a different tactic. I see what you're trying to do here, but um,
You know as well as I do, those people did not remember registering to vote the next day.
some of them voted for Ross Perot, I'm sure.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
and that
I'm sure they did.
changed that election. But
Well, and
um,
now that we don't have Kennedy anymore, so there's not sort of that kind of loose cannon guy. So I think if people vote for the one of the two or stay home.
the other part of this is our District 2 in Alabama, and I know that we don't have extensive polling on that. And I'm not sure that I trust it any more than I do the polling
Yeah,
on the presidential as far as what's going to affect it, because people show up to vote for the president, and that's going to have a huge impact.
they do.
Are people excited for Kamala Harris? Are people excited for Donald Trump in that district?
Well, it absolutely helps Republicans in this state. A presidential election helps Republicans in this state because Alabama is an overwhelming Republican state, has been for a very long time. And if that means more people turn out and vote down ballot, or we are a straight Republican ticket state, and if you go in and you're voting straight Republicans, then that absolutely helps that Republican candidate down ballot. Any Republican candidate down ballot.
Yeah, the numbers in District 2 do lean blue, so it could be
Yeah, they
could
do.
affect it a little
I
differently
think
there.
that race is going to be closer. I think that race will be closer than what people figure. I think it's
Um,
going to be interesting. I'm not saying you'll have that it will go Republican, but I think it's going to be close. Watch,
yeah,
I'll say that. Let's watch. Remind me that election night, Ike. Just tell me. Say, Lydia, you said it was going to be close. Although I will say, didn't call the last one. I did call Trump's first win about 2 months out. So I'm just going to say that's all. And I am not making any guesses on this presidential race. Don't ask because I have no idea. But I did call the last
I'm
one.
fascinated by District 2 because I think you could be absolutely right, and it could be closer. That's
Yeah.
what's so interesting to me is the possible variables in this election with the changing of the boundaries for the congressional
Yeah.
district. Just there may be something we don't yet understand that shows up on election day. So
Yep.
I'm interested to
Yeah.
see.
And again, it's, as small as things as the weather, and they change a polling place. And, there's a lot that goes into whether somebody's going to go take the time to stand in line. Because presidential races, we traditionally have lines.
Mhm.
And there's, is your kid sick that day, or is there something going on at school? I mean, there's all these kinds of things that can contribute to that. But you see it played out over the country, and there you go. You have
Yeah.
a totally different election. It just depends on what could happen.
Well, we'll see. I might have to have you back for this election. Talk a little bit about
And
stuff.
say, Lita, what was your prediction? How about this? I'll write it down and give it to you in an envelope. And then afterwards, you can open it up. How about that? We'll do that.
That's right, in real time.
Live on air.
Well, you know what? I do this quiz on Fridays, for this news quiz that the listeners come on and take it. And
Yeah.
to do that, I have a ding ding thing and a buzzer. So we
Oh,
could do
okay.
that when we
There you
open.
go.
Yeah, Lita, I've had a blast. Thanks so much for coming on.
Not a problem. Sounds good.
I'll let you get back to your busy work and life, and come back and see
Reading
us.
Post. Okay. Bye.
Sounds fun. Bye. And thanks everybody for listening to us. We will be back here bright and early tomorrow. Until then, come out and see what we're doing on the internet at al.com.